Would you look at that, we're back, and it's the number 16 team in my 2025 NFL Deep Dive Series, the Minnesota Vikings. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe to that YouTube thing. Wow, what a ride Minnesota's been on the last couple of years, and they're going to be rolling out my quarterback 2 from last year's rookie class, JJ McCarthy. I'm really excited about what McCarthy is going to have an opportunity to do. He looked pretty good in the preseason before he got hurt. He had, some little moments there, the very minimal NFL sample size that he provided. Overall, though, he's getting involved with one of the best coaching staffs in the entire league. This is a team that you're going to notice that maybe the player grades are not necessarily what you would expect from a team that did so well last year. Obviously, there's going to be some sort of step back because you don't know what you're getting from a rookie quarterback, and JJ McCarthy, for all intents and purposes, is a rookie quarterback coming into this season. Didn't get a full season even as a healthy player last year, so that is the thing that could probably hold back this team's overall grade the most, because when you see this coaching staff, between Kevin O'Connell and Wes Phillips and Brian Flores, it's hard to find a better group from top to bottom. Kevin O'Connell proved he's tremendous at bringing out the best in quarterbacks. He made Sam Darnold a ton of money. Wes Phillips can get a little bit of credit for that as well. Brian Flores showed that even with a defense that doesn't necessarily have these great individual talents, he was able to put together a very aggressive style defense that really played into the skill sets of all these guys. Jonathan Grenard had a great year. You had Dallas Turner come in. He showed a little bit of something as well. And they actually were able to improve the actual individual talent roster for him by bringing in Javon Hargrave, by bringing in Jonathan Allen to play on the interior defensive line. Now, that doesn't do a whole lot for the run defense, but from an interior pass rush perspective, they drastically improved what they had from the years prior. And then they got some good rotational pieces for the run game. But it's a defense that is very dependent on how Brian Flores schemes it up. Again, can't take anything away from Jonathan Grenard. On the offense side of the ball, going back there, the offensive line that is just mind-blowingly good. You're going to get something really, really great for JJ McCarthy there with Aaron Jones. They trade for Jordan Mason. So I think we're going to see a lot more going towards that McVay-Shanahan style offense of the run game and dedicating to the run game. Because when you have Christian Darrisaw, you have Brian O'Neill, and then you just brought in Ryan Kelly and Will Fries from the Indianapolis Colts, it's undeniable. It's undeniable. They used a first-round pick on Donovan Jackson, the guard out of Ohio State, who I'm not high on at all. I thought that was a tremendous reach. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But he's the 5th best offensive lineman on the team, on at least at the starting 5. Maybe he's the 6th or 7th best offensive lineman by my estimation, but it's still what an ideal situation for a rookie to come into to allow him to build, playing next to 2 tremendous veterans like Ryan Kelly at center and Christian Darrisaw at left tackle. Of course, they have Justin Jefferson, they have Jordan Addison, they have TJ Hawkinson. They got a really good weapons group there. Looking for compliments surrounding those guys. They got Ty Felton, the rookie, coming in. So that's going to be somebody who could sneaky have a good season just because so much attention is going to be given to the top 3 guys in this group. And if JJ McCarthy just happens to build a little bit of chemistry with this young guy, it could be a sneaky good season for a guy like Ty Felton. I would look out for that as well. We'll get to that. But we have to start with this coaching staff, a coaching staff that I love, a coaching staff that deserves so much praise for what they've been able to do. And it starts with the head coach, Kevin O'Connell, who 11th ranked head coach Kevin O'Connell, one of the better offensive minds in the league. He falls just outside the top 10 for me, and it's because there's the lack of playoff success over the last couple of seasons is what kind of holds him back. It's kind of like where my criteria meets to sort of separate that upper echelon of coaches. But for all intents and purposes, he is, especially last year with what he did with Sam Darnold, between him and Wes Phillips, what they did with Sam Darnold last year, and that's why Wes Phillips gets the number 3 ranking for me in offensive coordinator. The combination that these guys are together is just fantastic. They brought out in Sam Darnold what the entire NFL thought was in him when he was drafted 3rd overall by the Jets, and he just never was with a staff, I guess, competent enough to bring that out of him. And that's why I'm also so excited for what JJ McCarthy can bring, because I think JJ has a lot more versatility to his game than Sam Darnold does. That probably, in terms of what a ceiling would look like, probably has a higher ceiling than Darnold. So for these two guys to get their hands on him is going to be quite exciting to see. I wonder if Wes Phillips, though, with another strong performance, especially from a quarterback development standpoint, ends up being a head coaching candidate come this offseason. I think that that's a high likelihood. But they also have Josh McCown in there as the quarterback's coach. I could see if you get that success at the quarterback level, that McCown would sort of fill in that role if they were going to hire in-house. Keenan McCardell, the wide receiver coach, that's a fun little pick up there as well. But O'Connell comes from that Shanahan, McVay, LaFleur coaching tree, where it's such a quarterback-friendly offense that it allows you to build such confidence in your players. And when you have such high-level weapons like a Justin Jefferson, a TJ Hawkinson, I'll even throw Jordan Addison in there as a really high-end wide receiver too in the NFL. Even with like Aaron Jones, a really good running back out of the backfield. They just got Jordan Mason, who had a lot of success as a replacement starter for Christian McCaffrey just last year in San Francisco. So he just sort of will fit into this offense like a glove, and it'll be a nice little addition there to help out with Aaron Jones. It's a matter of how O'Connell prepares in the tight, tough situations. We've seen Minnesota perform really well in the clutch in the regular season. We haven't really seen that reflected when they've gotten to those win-or-go-home situations. And, you can blame some of that maybe on Kirk Cousins. Maybe you blame some of that on Sam Darnold and just not having, the quarterback that can truly finish the job. Now, if you guys are familiar with the last couple of videos, particularly the Seattle one, I have Sam Darnold coming into the season as 7th-ranked quarterback, and that is directly based upon what I feel this group was able to provide for him, the perspective they were able to provide for him. It was very Geno Smith-esque, his rise, in that he got into a situation that suited him so well that it really blew everything up. Now, being able to continue that here with JJ McCarthy, it's really a sign of, they picked up McCarthy for a reason. He was the guy that they knew was going to be the long-term starter. They saw the high upside in him. He was my quarterback 2. If you guys go back to some of my old mock drafts, the What I Would Do mock draft from that draft class, he was my quarterback 2 there. So I agree that they should be very high on him. We'll get to his assessment shortly. The one thing that they brought was the defensive side of the ball with Brian Flores, who comes in as my 4th-ranked defensive coordinator. What he was able to do with talent that, quite frankly, when you look at the talent for like just the pure individual skill standpoint, as we'll get to when we get to the player assignments, the player assessments, they're not these super high-end guys giving these super high-end performances. What they do is it's the most collective team effort on the defensive side of the ball that I think we've seen in a long time that Brian Flores has been able to put together. It's a really aggressive style of defense. He loves those exotic blitzes that you'll see and sort of like mixing in zone coverages, and it's been able, what that type of strategy has been able to do for the overall performance of the defense has made them actually very scary to play against. Now, from that it sort of transcends in sort of this intangible way what the individual players are truly able to do. Now they have some really good ones. You saw it in the thumbnail, Jonathan Grenard, who had a great year coming in, established himself as this team's edge one. Yet to be determined with Dallas Turner, last year's first-round pick. Andrew Van Ginkel, sort of this hybrid off-ball outside linebacker edge rusher, who unfortunately I feel is probably going to be the one that gets lost in the shuffle the most here. Even though he sort of came in with the most excitement around like the pedigree aspect. But Ivan Pace plays really, like Cashman, like they got some really good guys there in the front seven. They added Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen as the interior defensive linemen. Now, they don't really bring anything in terms of run defense, but how Brian Flores designs his defenses is that he'll be able to rotate these guys into positions where they'll actually not have to worry about carrying the load all that much. And I think having a guy like Mike Pettin as well as like an assistant coach sort of overseeing like his right-hand man type of a position, I think helps as well. You have these really experienced defensive coaches who have done it before. And, Brian Flores is quickly reestablishing himself as one of the top coaches in the entire league. I think, getting with Mike Tomlin, I think that time in Pittsburgh they had before coming to Minnesota, he really was able to, I think, take a step back and reassess his overarching strategies and his week-to-week preparation. And I think that really shined last year, and because it was a little bit different than what we were used to seeing out of him from his time in Miami, for example, or even in New England. There was enough similarities to it, but a lot of those rougher edges were really smoothed out last year. And I think that we'll continue to see individual players grow under Flores's defensive staff. And I think that as a collective effort, I think from a statistical output, you're going to see a lot of success from this defense yet again. Which is why when I think you guys see the overall defensive grades, you might be a little bit like, well, they definitely play better than that. And I think that that's absolutely true. They do play better than that. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way Brian Flores utilizes all those players. And he really has figured out how to properly place players on the field for the defensive side, especially in the secondary, to get the best out of them, to yield the best overall results for the team. And they operate in such it's 11 people really working as one, which is a unique thing for a lot of defenses. Usually when you get these high level defenses, you have like a TJ Watt in there, a Myles Garrett, who's sort of just a man on his own, making these giant plays. And then the other 10 guys, as long as they're doing their job, it should work out okay. But this defense is just 11 guys understanding exactly where they have to go, exactly where they have to be, communicating really well on the field. Ivan Pace does a great job of that. Blake Cashman does a great job of that from the linebacker positions. And all that comes through Brian Flores running the tight ship that he does. So as an overall staff, you're getting probably the best staff in the league. It's definitely up there. If it's not the best overall staff, it's got to be in the top 2 or 3 in the whole league. You'd have to really break down each staff for staff, like what their coordinators and coaches are ranked for me. But this is as good as it gets, and you're going to see a huge benefit for the entire roster and the team's success because of this. I wish I could jump in here with an ad break, but we're still short. So you gotta hit that thumbs up button, man. Help me out. Get those billionaire corporate evil money hoarding douches to send me money. Now let's get back to the player grades. So JJ McCarthy, in what, for all intents and purposes, this is going to be his rookie season. He got some action in preseason last year, very minimal, and then got injured and was out for the whole year. Darnold got all the reps. So he's coming in 26th to 27th with a 78 grade. The 78 grade is the same 78 I gave him last season, which I feel is the only fair way to go about it. Now, from a skill point, his ability, when you watch him back at Michigan in particular, there's all this crap about how he was like this check down bandit and never really did anything, got kind of carried by the offense, turn around, hand the ball off, and that's what he did. It's just not true. I think the perfect example of that is, number one, if you look at his last year at Michigan, throwing the ball short under 10 yards was his worst performing throw. Intermediate and deep balls were where he performed the best. He had 20 big time throws, 11 turnover plays, 80% adjusted completion percentage. He had a decent play action game. When he was kept clean, he was great. When he was blitzed, he was even playing pretty well. He was able to identify the blitzes coming in. He knew exactly where his outlets were. And I think that's another thing that people were seeing a lot of, was opposing defenses sending blitzes at Michigan, just trying to overwhelm the offense that they had there, and make sure that the run was stopped by having a lot of guys committed immediately to stopping it. That was a huge part of the game. And I think he was able to understand where his outlets were on those play action rollouts and all that, the boots. And he just did really well at that. But another thing that he did tremendously that was really underrated by just the layman and sort of the narrative that was going around on social media in particular and amongst football analysts, quote unquote, was what he did on third down, particularly third and medium and third and long. It kind of, again, throws out the whole concept that he was just some check down guy and some short throws and then that was it, slants and hooks and screens. You watch these third downs, the number of air yards they got were almost always more than what was required to get the first down. He was throwing the ball down the field past the first down markers on third downs more often than not, and it was a really aggressive play style. Now, from a runner's perspective, you're not going to see his running reflected in the rush threats section. He sort of teetered on it for me, especially in this offense. It teetered there for me last year, but this year, coming off the injury and everything, I just don't feel like the running threat is going to be all there. It's going to be there all that much. I think that they're going to tailor this offense around him being able to do what he does really well also, which was, again, an underrated aspect, was his ability to get to his second and third reads. You can see it all the time in all of his Michigan highlights, and that, working with Jim Harbaugh, who has such a tremendous history of getting quarterbacks to play at these high levels, for him to go from that to be handed off here to Kevin O'Connell, like who we've talked about. Kirk Cousins had the best years of his career with O'Connell. Sam Darnold had the best year of his career with O'Connell. To go from that to what he has now, it's going to be a really nice streamlined development process for him. And maybe sitting out the whole year, being forced to sit out the whole year, will do a whole lot of benefit for him. Now he's coming in, you got to get the confidence back, that subconscious, oh my God, I'm going to get injured again. Once you get over that hurdle, hopefully he gets over that hurdle relatively quickly. Then we'll see what kind of a rushing threat he'll be after that. But I don't think in terms of a designed run, other than, the odd, maybe like second and short, third and short, read option play, I don't think that they're going to be drawing up a whole lot of JJ McCarthy runs. If they're going to use extensions of the run game, they have too many weapons that you can get the ball in their hands quickly in those scenarios and have like the pass game be an extension of the run game, that it's not worth risking it, because from a backup quarterback perspective, you have Sam Howell and whatever, but this is very much JJ McCarthy's team, and they are going to want him to become a traditional quarterback in this system. They're going to move the pockets around. They're going to use this athleticism to get him out in space to make the throws, easier for him and make it the reads easier for him, like one side of the field reads in those scenarios. But I think that this is really shaping up where if JJ McCarthy can catch on early, that this could be another Sam Darnold level season, just because I don't particularly see anything in terms of arm talent. Now, there is a slight thing with JJ McCarthy about his release that I noticed watching him. Now, I could just be nitpicking here a bit, but there is a little bit of a slower release on his throw that I was picking up on. Like, it kind of comes from like an adjustment to a slight sidearm throw that does delay the release from the pullback. From like, you cock it back and you throw it in the cock back, and then to the follow through, there's a little bit like a twist that delays it a little bit. I don't know how significant that will be, how much defenses will be able to take advantage of that, because the ball does come out with enough arm strength, at least from what I saw, where it's still going to be difficult for the defenses to get in front of it. Now, unless he's staring down a receiver, that's where it could become an issue. You're going to want him to get away from doing that, especially with that little caveat to his throw. That that could become something that could backfire tremendously, which is why you kind of got to temper the expectations here and not grade him so high, just expecting him to be Sam Darnold next year. I think that would be a little bit unfair, but I think just from a decision-making perspective, a accuracy perspective, and a mobility perspective, McCarthy is as good as anybody you can put into this situation. So we'll see how he develops going forward and how this coaching staff can get him to the right place, because he has all the weapons in the world to really work with. And that's where we get to this group here. It's the 12th ranked weapons group for me. And there's going to be a bunch of different ways they're going to bring out this personnel. The obvious is sort of 12 personnel with Josh Oliver, who gets a really pretty high grade there at 75 for a backup tight end. To run some 12 personnel with Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson, Oliver, and then Aaron Jones in the backfield. That's going to be, I think, the majority of what we're going to see from them, especially on those first and second downs. When you get to third down, that's really where you're going to see Ty Felton and Jalen Nailor competing with each other for snaps and for playing time. It'll be really interesting to see how Ty Felton and Jalen Nailor, what that competition ends up yielding, because Naylor's sort of been this under-the-radar, decent option. Ty Felton's being brought in because they think that his upside is just going to be higher than Naylor's. That's why you draft a guy in that situation. But just with the top two guys that they have out there that are going to be out there all the time, as long as they behave themselves and take care of their bodies, starts with Justin Jefferson, coming off of 1,591 yards, almost 1,600 yards. 10 touchdowns. He had 158 targets. His contested catches were actually pretty damn good. He had 17 completed contested catches for almost 55%. His route running at all three levels he's as elite as it comes with a 95 grade. And to continuously be put as a majority outside receiver and being able to win on the outside, and then being able to kick in, a quarter of the time into the slot and create these just horrific matchup issues for opposing defenses. It's really what makes him super special at the end of the day. And he runs with such a speed, but with such an ease in it. Like, it's like a glide that he does, where it looks like he's barely moving at all. It's like, I don't know if people remember watching Usain Bolt run, but when Usain Bolt would run, it didn't look like he was trying to run fast, but he was just faster than everybody. Justin Jefferson has a lot of that on the field, where he takes these long strides, like way longer than you would expect him to. Like, really go and watch him run, especially those deep to intermediate drag routes that he runs that he just mastered. The reason why he's mastered is because he can take these longer strides where it doesn't really look like he's going that fast, and he's able to disguise that second gear that he has, because he takes those long strides where he's not really putting in all that much effort, and it's still a fast move and he's covering a lot of distance. But then he gets the ball in his hands, and then you see him, he turns on the speed really quickly, and it takes him to that next level, that next gear, and it throws off opposing defenders all the time, because especially when they're in zone coverage or they're in trailing man coverage, they're sort of trying to anticipate, is he going to stop and I'm going to run right by him? You don't want to be in that situation. Or where do I feel like he's going to end up here at this amount of time? I'm going to time my time, reestablishing my zone and all that. And how far do I chase him? And how quickly do I go after and chase him with these other routes coming? His way to disguise all that throws off these defenders, which is why he's able to create so much separation down the field. And the fact that he only had 6 drops on 108 catches and 158 targets, yeah, you'd like to see that not be a thing at all, but there's so few receivers out there that are going to see that many targets that aren't going to be credited with a couple of drops. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about that. 106.3 passer rating when he's targeted. Just elite level stuff. Then you go to Jordan Addison, who him and T. Higgins, like, you got these Devontae Smith, these super high level wide receiver twos who would be these lower end to middle wide receiver ones in any other situation. He comes in and he brings just another dynamic there. Still got the speed, only 66 catches on 100 targets, but a shockingly good contested catch guy. He had 12 for almost 55% completions, 112.2 when targeted for a passer rating. He operated his best in that 10 to 19 yard area last year. He did a little bit of work in the the tunnel screen game and whatnot, but his size kind of plays against him there. He's not the biggest guy in the world. He's got this like lankiness to him, like a skinniness to him. But again, really established as an outside guy. Can kick into the slot a little bit more often than Justin Jefferson did. But he's able to do the same things in the slot. The same sort of concept of putting him in the slot as you do with Justin Jefferson is you want to create these weird matchup issues. You want to sort of allow him to get lost at the intermediate level, which is where he did his best work, sort of just like right behind those linebackers and underneath the safeties, force those guys to make decisions. And if they don't want to come down too close, because then Jefferson's over the top of them. So it opens up those huge opportunities for him there as well. Has a pretty good nose for the end zone. The yards after catch for both of them is not nearly as high as you'd think. I think it was really way lower for Jordan Addison than I thought it was going to be. Just because I feel like his best highlights are him catching the ball and getting that run after the catch. Just being able to burn guys around the corner, get around the corner, hit that edge, and get downfield. With such speed and quickness and suddenness to him. So that was very surprising. I wonder how much that's going to change as they appeal to the JJ McCarthy skill set, which him being so good in the intermediates, I think is going to be something that JJ McCarthy is really going to be able to exploit. Then you get down to the tight end position, and we talked about the 12 personnel possibilities, but it's TJ Hawkinson as just this weapon at the tight end position where the stats don't really do him justice. They haven't done him justice, last year at all. He had 2 drops last year. He had 11 contested catches, almost 65%. But he operates at such an elite level at all levels of the field. His ability to play inline tight end and still be a receiving threat the way he is kind of a unique skill set that he's acquired that a lot of the other top tight ends in the league just don't really have. We covered Trey McBride. He doesn't play inline as much as Hawkinson does. Brock Bowers is going to be coming up shortly. He doesn't play inline. He's mostly in the slot. McBride mostly in the slot. He's sort of as much of a throwback tight end as there is, where you get Tony Gonzalez, you get Gronk playing like as a true inline tight end and then kicking out to the slot, for a third or a quarter of the time, the way that we see Hawkinson do now. And his aggressiveness in the blocks, in the running game as a blocker, combining that with Josh Oliver, is just a perfect fit for what this offense wants to do. And his ability to use motion, again, just being a really good athlete. You'd like to see these numbers improve this year. You want to get a full healthy season out of him. You want to get a true healthy season of production out of TJ Hawkinson this upcoming season. He's going to get all the opportunities in the world. I think especially because they've added so much to the running back room. With having Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason as your top 2 backs. They drafted Trey Stewart as well, who I was sort of, sneaky on him. It's the 14th best running back room at the end of the day. Aaron Jones, quality starter. Jordan Mason is a tremendous backup. He showed that he can be a really good replacement level player when he replaced Christian McCaffrey. But Aaron Jones, he sort of just falls under the radar as being this great back. He had 5 fumbles last year, but he still had almost 1,200 yards. He carried the ball 265 times, 9 explosive carries, 50 first downs. He had some really good yards after contact. He's like a sneaky, powerful runner for a guy his size. You'd expect him to be closer to what you see out of these like really, really small backs, like I don't want to go so small like Darren Sproles, but you go back and you look at Reggie Bush, for example, Bush was like the smaller guy who had an explosiveness to him. Aaron Jones has a lot of that in terms of his physical makeup, but from just being able to hit the hole with power and being able to break tackles of linebackers and everything, Aaron Jones does that way better than he probably should. Shockingly, people expect him to kind of be washed because he left Green Bay, and I think he's just fallen under the radar ever since leaving Green Bay, just because he's sort of in the shadow of these bigger names, these more exciting names, Justin Jefferson, and then, they had the Kirk Cousins thing for a while there, TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison, first round pick. But I think that's perfect for his game, is to sort of just be that behind the scenes guy who is just really solid to go to. And, you've been looking for a great compliment for him for a while, since he got here last year or the year before that, one of those two. But when you have Jordan Mason in there, he can come in, be a really good compliment. You can give the ball to Jordan Mason 10 times a game and keep Aaron Jones at 20 touches a game. And I think that will increase the longevity of Aaron Jones' effectiveness. Now, I do wonder, when do the wheels fall off of Aaron Jones? Just because you get closer and closer and closer every year with all the tread that gets put on the tires of these guys. I think that's why a concerted effort to get Jordan Mason, to draft Trey Stewart, that's all in the name of increasing the longevity of Aaron Jones, which is why I think from a fantasy football perspective, he may not be this top guy going into this season, Aaron Jones. He may not be the 1,200-yard rusher this year. He may only be like this, like a 250 touch guy this year. But I think that'll actually be good for the long-term benefit of the offense's production. So, a nice developed run game here with a deep running back group. Hopefully with a positive performances from the offensive line, there'll be a lot less linemen putting the hurting on them and getting that bump card, that tackle card, adding notches to it. Because it all really is a good offensive line. They're 8th in pass blocking for me, 13th in run blocking. They made a very specific effort in the offseason to improve the offensive line, which is why they rebuilt the entire interior in one offseason. That being, drafting Donovan Jackson, the guard out of Ohio State. Now, I wasn't high on Donovan Jackson coming out. He had like a day 3 grade for me. So him going as early as he did really kind of threw off the overall perception of what this offensive line could be. Because I look at Justin School and I look at Blake Brandel and I was like, okay, they're really good replacement level guys. But I'd almost prefer Blake Brandel to be the starter in week 1 to just raise up the offensive line's floor here. I understand Donovan Jackson from a perspective of his ceiling is obviously the higher out of all those guys involved. Fine. And I guess him being the 5th best offensive lineman of the group takes a lot of the pressure off. And, Ryan Kelly's going to be able to get over to him and help him out. And the fact that he's got Christian Darrisaw, who's one of the best left tackles in the entire league next to him, is also a huge benefit because Darrisaw can be put out on that island. And then in the run game, he can help him out on some of the double teams, hit those duos and up to the second level. Be able to be communicating with him to make sure he does the right thing. It'll be really beneficial for Donovan Jackson because Darrisaw comes in, only got 231 pass snaps last year, 2 sacks. It wasn't his best pass blocking performance when he was on the field. Now, from a run perspective, he's really taken up that mantle that we've seen from Trent Williams out in San Francisco. And because the offenses are so similar, he just fills that role really well. An A- zone grade, an A- gap blocking grade. He's a really great performer in the run game. And I think as they have clearly made a concerted effort to improve on the run game this season and make more of a commitment to it, I think you'll see how much he can further establish himself as one of the top run blocking tackles in the league. And on the other side of Donovan Jackson is the veteran Ryan Kelly, who's coming over from Indianapolis, who he's been one of the better centers in the NFL since he came into the league. From a pass blocking perspective, he's one of the best. Only gave up 1 sack, 11 pressures, took 1 penalty only in pass protection, 324 snaps in total. It was time for him to move on in Indianapolis, clearly, but to come in and upgrade the center position from what they had in Garrett Bradbury and to give him to basically, again, a glorified rookie quarterback, what he's going to be able to teach JJ McCarthy is going to be invaluable. In the run blocking, the concern is that he's just not a great zone blocker. So I think there could be a down trend in that sense because Garrett Bradbury was literally the opposite of that. So I don't know if they run some more gap, maybe he'll be a useful guy in there. But I think from just an experience perspective, he's going to be a tremendous asset for this offensive line. And then they got him as Indianapolis Colts, running buddy at the right guard position, Will Fries, who comes in as sort of like the opposite of what Ryan Kelly is. He's not the greatest pass blocker, but from a run blocking perspective, he's fantastic. So I think, that was a great upgrade for the guard position. I think having that instant chemistry with those two is going to open up the game a lot more, I think, than people give credit for. You'd love to have those guys who play next to each other on an offensive line or a defensive line who have years with them, because then, they can communicate with each other without talking. They sort of know what the other person's thinking. They know, given a certain look or a certain situation, what the other guy would do in that scenario, and they know what to do in terms of responding to that. So that's something that this offensive line is really going to benefit from here. And then they have just a veteran and Brian O'Neill, who has been notoriously the most solid right tackle in the league for the last 5-6 years. 699 snaps, took 5 penalties, which isn't bad for almost 700 snaps, only gave up 4 sacks. He's not this elite level tackle. He's not Lane Johnson or anything like that. But he's definitely this guy that when you have him out there on at the tackle position, that position is settled. You don't need to worry about it. You don't need to worry about overcompensating on that side, with chip blocks and everything. You can run a very balanced offense, switching things up from side to side without having to worry about him giving up something big on his side of the field. Even from a run blocking perspective, his zone run blocking, he's an A. Now, he's a D+ in gap. He does lose a lot in that. So it does temper his grade a little bit, but I could see him going out and quickly reestablishing himself as one of the best run blocking tackles in the league as well. And then him and Darisaw getting back up to being that truly elite tackle duo in both aspects, pass blocking and run blocking, because they were that for a little bit the last season or two. But as Brian O'Neill gets older, his down-to-down performances have sort of decreased in terms of the quality. It's not significant. Again, it's kind of nitpicking here with him, trying to sort of bring him back down to earth a little bit. But just from an overall grade, I think the flow of what this offensive line is, very similar skill sets. You do worry about the zone blocking from Ryan Kelly, but the growth that you could see from the veteran players mixing in Donovan Jackson here, and then having some pretty good depth. Justin School is a really good depth tackle that they have, and Blake Brando's going to be a really good depth interior guy. So from a bench perspective, they even have some pretty good bodies. I think Logan Brown is also the rookie. He's a little bit under the radar in terms of what he can bring. I think he's a really good tackle number 4. So between those 3 guys bringing the assessment up to 8 offensive linemen, they got a pretty good group happening here, and I'd be really excited about how they can help this offense and further this offense's development and help JJ McCarthy get comfortable quickly, because that is what really drags down the overall grade of the offense. So it is the 17th ranked offense, 3rd best offensive coordinator, 14th best running game, 25th in passing game. And that's really, when, as you look at it,
suffering from the JJ McCarthy grade, where you wonder how much and how quickly JJ McCarthy is going to be able to be this dynamic passer.
Now it's Brian Flores' defense, and like I said sort of at the top, the individual player talent isn't as great as you would expect it to be when you look at how great this defense can perform. I think Brian Flores does have a nice little variety of bodies to work with here, and it starts with the defensive line, where the variety is just really, really present and really apparent.
It's just not as good of a group as you'd expect. And man, I looked at it and I went, really? When I added all the things up, and then I did the sort with everyone else in the league, I saw 26 best pass rush, and I went, wow, really? And then I thought about it, and then it was like, well, yeah, because they do everything really as a unit. Outside of what Jonathan Grenard, Van Ginkel and Dallas Turner, they weren't particularly great pass rushers last year. It was really just Jonathan Grenard doing a lot of the work, and then blitzers got free, and interior defensive linemen who just kept working were able to make up for some of the lapses and the coverage sacks and all that. So it really wasn't all that shocking. It was a lot of Brian Flores' just scheming that made this work. But then they did add Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen to help out with that pass rush grade, but they don't bring anything for you in terms of the run defense. From a depth perspective, you got Gabriel Murphy and Bo Richter and a couple other guys who just aren't quality NFL players, who are just at best depth pieces. Then you got Harrison Phillips and Jalen Redmond can kick in run defense here, but they're not particularly fantastic at that either. The only one that does anything particularly fantastic coming in this, I truly believe in, is Jonathan Grenard, who I think is in prime position to take that next step up. He was 17th in win percentage just last year, had 11 sacks, 84 pressures, 2 batted balls. He was the guy that was doing a lot of the grunt work out there that was leading to a lot of overall success for the defense. Now, he wasn't out there performing like TJ Watt, or Myles Garrett or Max Crosby by any means. He was sort of hovering in that borderline tier 2 edge rusher 1, which is a good place for him to be when you have especially a defensive coordinator that is as intelligent and bright as Brian Flores is and as creative and aggressive as he is. It benefits these types of players. And Jonathan Grenard's coming over from just last year. He was with DeMeco Ryans, and he was with these great defensive coaches like a Lovie Smith, for example. Say what you want about Lovie Smith, but having that year with him did Jonathan Grenard great. And he did come out here and have probably his best season, taking advantage of the scheme and the work some of the other players were putting in. Even from a run defense perspective, he did pretty well. He forced 3 fumbles, was 28th in stops percentage. 42 tackles, not so bad. But from just being a disciplined edge setter, he brought really great things in that aspect as well. So it really worked out for Jonathan Grenard making this move to Minnesota, where many people felt just, by this, they added Van Ginkel and they added Dallas Turner, that this was all going to become, he was sort of going to get lost in the shuffle the way that he was going to in Houston when they added all the bodies that they added there. But Van Ginkel, again, he's sort of this edge linebacker hybrid player. And Dallas Turner, just you want to give him more opportunities. He's a former first-round pick. Obviously, they're very high on him. It's him and Grenard seem to be the goal for what this edge room is going to look like on a down-to-down basis. And Dallas Turner can bring something on early downs as well. He's shockingly good at that. I think just playing back in Alabama, that having that aspect to his game is just a natural thing he was able to acquire. They brought in Javon Hargrave, peaked in Philadelphia, and hasn't really repeated that. He did well in San Francisco's first year, showed some signs of regression towards the end of the run there and then into last season. So there is a concern that that's going to be a thing here. And I think that just from a run defense perspective, I think he'll lose out on snaps. He'll be more of a situational interior defensive player because I think Harrison Phillips, because of his run ability and his ability to play nose tackle, will kick in for sure there. So we'll probably only see Javon Hargrave in pass rushing situations. And then Jonathan Allen coming over from Washington, probably a year or two too late to bring Jonathan Allen onto your team and expect him to be like this superstar player. Because, it's possible. There were signs of regression, but I think there's also the aspect of, was he putting in the effort that was he putting his best foot forward as a member of the Washington Commanders towards the end of his run? Because there was a lot of talk about him, getting traded or getting cut and all that stuff, for a while in Washington. As they added guys like Fedarian Mathis and extended Deron Payne and all that, you just kind of knew the writing was on the wall for him. So him coming in, getting a new lease on life, you hope that he'll be able to get back to that high level. I just don't know at this point in his career, at this age, that that's something he's going to be capable of doing. He did only have about 420 snaps last year. And I expect in this defense for him to be part of a rotation. Now, I think he will get the most snaps out of all the guys here involved, because I do think from an overall perspective, he's the best player in that interior defensive line room. But they have enough guys with enough talent worthy of getting on the field, at least situationally, that I don't think they'll just run him into the ground either. So it'll be interesting to see how much he truly is used. But there's just nobody here in this group other than Jonathan Grenard who brings anything in terms of run defense. So I think that could be a real downfall for this group overall and put a lot of pressure on this linebacker group, which is a good linebacker group, but you don't want to put all the pressure of the world to defend the run on these linebackers, which is kind of what is happening here. Luckily, they're the third best linebacker group in terms of run defense. Now, in terms of pass coverage, 22nd, 23rd-ish for me. They got just body after body after body, though, in terms of being able to defend the run. From Pace and Cashman, you got Kobe King, the rookie, coming in, who's going to be at least able to do that for you early on. Not going to give you much in pass coverage. Then you got Eric Wilson, who's like this really balanced third linebacker. Brian Asamoah, unfortunately, at the time seems to have passed him by. He never really reached the levels that they were hoping. But I think it's a really good, deep linebacker group here that's going to be able to create some opportunities. And it starts with Ivan Pace, the undrafted free agent who just blew up the entire league from the moment he got on the field. And you want to see him get back to, what he was. He only accounted 47 tackles last year. You want a healthy season out of him where he can play across the board. And I think that you can put him in situations where his skill set against the run can be used. And his lack of in pass coverage can be sort of hidden, because even though he did have minimal amount of playing time last year, he still gave up 2 touchdowns. So that's not great. I think he blitzed really well. He got 20 pressures in that time. So it's just a blitzing threat. I think that helps him in passing situations. And I think when you have all the bodies that you have out there, like you have a guy like Andrew Van Ginkel who can play off-ball linebacker as well and be a blitzing threat because he's got those edge rusher capabilities. Pairing those two up in those situations could be a thing that we see as well. You get Ivan Pace sort of lined up in the C gap almost, or B gap, and then Blake Cashman sits there, plays in the A gap in a traditional 4-3 set maybe, or like a 3-3 defense perhaps. Because Blake Cashman, after breaking out under DeMeco Ryans in Houston, he came back and he followed it up with a pretty good campaign here in Minnesota. 86 tackles, he had 31 pressures. So they're sending, this is what I'm talking about with Brian Flores and his aggressiveness, sending these blitzes to have Blake Cashman 31 pressures, Ivan Pace 20 pressures. It's to be able to get linebackers free on a quarterback. It makes for a fun defense, it makes for an unpredictable defense, and it makes for a headache for opposing quarterbacks and opens up opportunities for everybody else. Because you got to account now for if there's blitzes there, then you get a free runner off the edge perhaps. there's just so many possibilities you get here. And when you have these athletes, like Blake Cashman's a great athlete, he struggled notoriously throughout his career, with the Jets and all that to stay healthy. But there was no denying what he could be if he was healthy, just because his athletic profile was so great. And we've seen that now in Houston and into Minnesota. So there's a lot to be excited about there. Kobe King and Eric Wilson as rotational pieces, like we said, I think would be very good. Especially if you want to use Blake Cashman more in pass coverage situations and Eric Wilson in pass coverage situations. You do have Josh Metellus, who we'll get to, and come up play some linebacker as well. But if you want to play a more traditional linebacker in pass coverage, you can have Cashman, you can have Eric Wilson. And then in more true run situations, that's when you throw in Kobe King to play with Ivan Pace, for example. And it's just a really solid group in that sense. Not being a great coverage group is really the least of my concerns when it comes to a linebacking group. It's sort of like defensive backs when it comes to the run support. It's not the most pressing thing. And you can get away with having a great linebacker. Ivan Pace, perfect example. A great linebacker who's going to get 3 downs worth of play every game and every series, who isn't this great coverage guy, but he's so good against the run. He's such a solid traditional Mike linebacker that he sort of transcends all that and raises the group to a level, and then it helps the front four out, just because, from a communication standpoint, a football IQ standpoint, he brings so much. So it's a really good linebacking group here. I don't know that too many people consider this to be a great linebacker group because there's not like a flashy player on it. You know what I mean? Like there isn't a Fred Warner. There isn't, whoever, you name them. Roquan Smith, like these flashy big splash play guys. They just don't have that. It's a unit that works so well with each other, and they know exactly how to use their skill sets to the best of their advantages, and the defensive coordinators right on cue with them on everything, that it just works for them. And I think that hopefully something happens where the league starts to fully acknowledge this linebacking group as one of the better ones in the NFL, because I just don't see them getting credit that they deserve, and they deserve more credit than what they're getting. Now here's the most questionable group of them all. It's the secondary, because they have guys out here that have benefited so much from Brian Flores' scheme. And we start with the most obvious, and that's Byron Murphy, who came over from Arizona. And he was coming over from Arizona as like this true traditional, just straight up nickel corner. And Brian Flores plays him on the outside, and he actually plays very well in that space. He still gets almost half of his snaps. What would it be half? It's 3/4 of his snaps. Overall, 40% of his snaps. Jesus. Tell me I'm not a mathematician. About 40% of his snaps are from the slot still, but it's because they have such a variety of guys, and they mix and they match. They do multiple fronts and all that. It sort of goes back to that the Vrabel Belichick thing that Brian Flores comes from, where you have guys that are, quote, safeties or, quote, corners or, quote, nickels, and you sort of move them around depending on the situation that you're in. And it forces the opposing offenses to identify these guys and where they are. And you go from thinking you're going to pick on a certain player for him not even being in that spot at that point in time. It's a completely different guy that you had no interest on picking on in that situation. And it forces them to remain hyper aware. Now, from a top-end, high-end talent level, Byron Murphy's just not that guy. He never really has been that guy. From an athlete perspective, he's just not this high-level athlete. He's not particularly over-aggressive in the run game either, though he does get a C grade. He's sort of right down the middle there. I bet, see what I did there? Isaiah Rodgers is the best in terms of run defending out of this corner group. It's just a mystery to me whether or not he can get back to that level where he peaked his final year in Indianapolis, right before that scandal and all that broke. If he can get back to that level, then I think he's a really solid cornerback too. there is Mekhi Blackman sort of breathing down his neck to a large degree. They brought in Jeff Okudah and Tavier Thomas as well, who, Jeff Okudah is just, he keeps getting opportunities because he's the former 3rd overall pick. He's flashed some good stuff, but he's just hasn't lived up to it. And I think when you have Dwight McGlovern as well in there, I don't see where Jeff Okudah fits in, but he's going to get opportunities. He's currently listed on the official depth chart going into preseason as the starting outside corner. So there's something to that. Maybe Brian Flores feels he can get the most out of Jeff Okudah. I don't know. I'm not projecting him being the starter for very long. I'll say that. I think that ends up, it yields to the 4 guys that you see here. Maybe Blackman's inability in the run game hurts him a little bit, but I think you're less concerned about that than you are the coverage skills. And I think Blackman, you can see him being on the ascension for the most part. And then they got 2 vets there on the back end. Harrison Smith, still quality, man. Still quality. He ain't the top safety in the league like he was before, where he was just ball hawking and smashing people and all that. But he's still, he's still going to play that deep third safety in those cover 3 situations while, Metellus sort of runs around with the chicken with his head cut off. He's still able to make plays on the back end too. 89.7 pass rating when targeted. Only took 2 penalties. Gave up 37 catches. Still making tackles out there. He's still flying around, man. Harrison Smith has still got it to at least some degree here. How long he's going to play, how much longer he's going to play, that's still up in the air. But he's still quality, and you hope that you can maybe get a 3rd guy out of the safety group to fill in for his role, because you have Josh Metellus, who is not a traditional safety. He's listed as a starting safety, but he's your box safety. He's your dime linebacker. He'll play in the slot. He's going to come up, make some big plays in the run. He's really aggressive for his size. He's a really good player for this type of defense where it's multiple fronts. We just covered the idea of Kyle Duggar and Marte Mapu and Jabril Peppers in the New England Patriots video, where their skill set benefits so much in that type of defense because they can come up and play linebacker. And Josh Metellus is the best version of that player, I'd say, probably in the whole league, which is why he's able to continuously get work. Because from a coverage perspective, as a traditional safety even, he's not good. Like, he's not that type. It's just not his. It's not the type of player that he is. He's like this 1970s style NFL player that sort of dropped into the 2020s of the world by accident. It's like he's 2 generations too late into the NFL to be considered like the best safety in the league. But there's not a whole lot about his game that if you look back and you go, man, if he was playing in 1991, he'd be the best safety in the league by far, because he plays everywhere. He can cover all different types of guys, tight ends, running backs, slot receivers. As long as the slot receiver is not this like super speedy guy, if it's more like a fundamentally sound, like foundational old school slot, then he can cover that guy no problem. He can play a decent middle zone as a dime linebacker. It's when he gets into the deeper areas, he doesn't have the athleticism to really keep up with those top level wide receivers and those true speed threats. You got Jay Ward and Theo Jackson, who, again, you're hoping one of those guys, maybe you convert one of the corners into a safety. You just want to get one of those guys in there, be a 3rd safety that you can put out there to just lessen the workload on Harrison Smith, because he's going to be back there as it currently stands as that deep 3rd safety, just sideline to sideline. And I don't think he's got the athleticism, the endurance to withstand doing that for an entire season without the wheels falling off in a significant way that can hurt this defense. So, it's up to getting Jay Ward or Theo Jackson developed and up to speed to sort of protect from that. But they're a really aggressive defensive back group that could get them into trouble. But it fits in with what Brian Flores wants to run as a defensive coordinator. So that's why this group really does outperform the 21st coverage grade in particular. So much like the offense, it's my 17th ranked defense. Good against the run. I question the pass just on an individual skill to skill set. Because they're so aggressive with the 4th ranked defensive coordinator Brian Flores, that if those blitzes don't get home, that's where you see the defense really struggle. Is when the blitzes don't get home, that's when the defense has gotten really exploited, historically with Brian Flores. So that's something to really look for, and you hope that that's not the case, because they just don't have the top end individual talent, by my opinion, to make up for being sort of left on islands all by themselves if the blitzes and the aggressiveness and the twists and the stunts and all that don't end up working out on a particular play or a particular drive. From a schedule perspective, they got the 7th hardest schedule. Their Vegas over-under is 8.5 wins. I'm still picking the over here. There's 5 games here where I go that's guaranteed wins. The home game with Chicago, the home game with Atlanta and Cincinnati. They catch Cincinnati early in the year, which is always beneficial. And then they got Cleveland and they got Dallas there late. They only have 3 games where I go, these are games that they're for sure going to lose. They have to go on the road to the Chargers. They have to play Baltimore. And then they got to go on the road to Green Bay. And I think Green Bay is not a significantly better team, but they are a better team than them. But they could split the series with Green Bay. They should probably split the season series with Detroit. So right there, you got your 7 wins. So now you need to find 2 more in, you're going to the Giants late in the year. What's their quarterback situation going to look like? You draw Washington at home. You got Chicago there on the road. Maybe could you take both games against Chicago? You probably could. So you get Pittsburgh. You gotta go on the road to Pittsburgh, but is Aaron Rodgers going to be as good as people expect, or is he going to be terrible? How's that offense going to look? Is TJ Watt, is the defense going to be healthy and executing? There's some X factors there, but I would still bank on Minnesota getting to 9 wins this year and having an above 500 record. I think there's just enough here that it should be a sure bet. Despite it being a tougher schedule, they drew some of the tougher teams, mostly within their division, and then get Philly at home. That's really beneficial for them. Washington at home, that it works out in terms of the quality of team they're playing, but where they're playing them. So overall, they're my 16th ranked team, smack dab right there in the middle. 11th head coach, 17th offense, 17th defense. It's the most balanced team in terms of grading that I've seen so far. That makes me happy to a degree, and I think that they're a team that, as the season goes on, I would look for them to be more and more of a threat.
And there it is, my number 16 team, the Minnesota Vikings. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit the like button. You've made it this far after all. Subscribe. You've made it this far after all. Even if you watched the last hour or so, or you just skip through the chapters and you hate me, just subscribe and hate me on my number 15 video when it comes up in a couple of moments. It might already be up depending on when you're watching this, but either way, I hope to see you guys next time.